The worn canvas bag at Liam Carter's feet made CEO Amelia Sterling laugh out loud in the middle of the first-class cabin. She decided the quiet single father had wandered into the wrong seat, then demanded a flight attendant search the suspicious bag beneath him. But when the sealed lock finally clicked open, there were no cheap clothes inside. A military hard drive, a classified base map, and a Special Forces badge stared back at her. Liam did not flinch. He simply asked, in a calm and level voice, who exactly had given the order to open that bag. Stay with this story to the end to learn why one old bag put an entire nation on high alert. Liam Carter arrived at the airport before dawn, dressed in a plain charcoal jacket, a simple button shirt, and boots that had clearly seen years of use. The only thing he never let out of arm's reach was a faded canvas bag, its seams patched by hand more than once. Ticket agents glanced at it the way people glance at something cheap and forgettable, but Liam paid no attention to their opinions. His eyes moved instead to the cameras, the emergency exits, and the handful of travelers lingering too long near the check-in counters. His ticket had been quietly upgraded to first class at the last possible moment, on instructions from a government office he never named aloud. He had no idea that the woman seated beside him would be Amelia Sterling, chief executive of one of the country's largest defense contractors. Amelia arrived with her strategy director, Logan Pierce, visibly irritated that a mechanical fault on her private jet had forced her onto a commercial flight for the first time in years. When she saw a man in plain clothes already seated where she expected comfort and privacy, she assumed the airline had made an error. Her eyes drifted from his worn jacket down to the shabby bag tucked beneath his feet, and her expression made her judgment plain without a single word spoken. Liam did not argue or explain himself. He simply checked his watch, then let his gaze settle briefly on a man in a black cap near the boarding door, a man carrying no luggage at all. A crooked lock on Liam's bag caught the light differently than any lock sold to ordinary travelers, though nobody around him noticed. Meanwhile, Logan sent a short message from his phone, careful to keep the screen tilted away from Amelia. The words on it read simply that the target had boarded. As the cabin door swung shut and sealed, Liam noted that the man in the black cap had taken a seat exactly 6 rows behind him, close enough to matter. Liam had learned years earlier never to trust a room simply because it looked calm. Airports in particular carried a certain rhythm, a pattern of movement that most travelers never noticed, and he had spent enough of his life reading that rhythm to sense the moment it broke. The man without luggage stood too straight, watched the boarding gate too carefully, and never once reached for a phone the way ordinary passengers did while waiting. Liam filed the detail away without letting his face show a flicker of concern. He thought briefly of his daughter, asleep back home under the care of a neighbor who had grown used to these early departures. She never asked many questions about his work, content instead with the quiet routine they had built together since her mother's passing. That routine was the only thing Liam truly protected anymore, and it was the reason he had chosen a life far smaller than the one he once lived inside a classified unit most people would never hear about. Amelia, for her part, barely noticed any of it. Her attention stayed fixed on her phone, on missed calls from the maintenance crew who had grounded her jet, and on Logan's steady, reassuring presence beside her. She trusted him completely, the way a person trusts someone who has never once given them a reason to look closer. That trust, quiet and unexamined, would prove to be the most dangerous thing on the entire flight. Amelia asked Liam to move the bag into the overhead bin, expecting quick compliance from a man dressed the way he was. Instead, he refused calmly, explaining only that the bag needed to remain within his own reach at all times. The answer irritated her more than she expected, and she decided he was simply trying to seem important in front of strangers. In front of the other passengers and the lead flight attendant, she remarked openly that the bag looked like something pulled from a second-hand bin. Logan pretended to defend Liam while quietly planting a different kind of doubt, wondering aloud whether the bag might hold something genuinely dangerous. His words spread suspicion through Amelia and the attendant far more effectively than open hostility would have. As the plane prepared to taxi, an attendant noticed a small pool of liquid near Liam's seat, though in truth a hired operative named Hunter Cole had placed a harmless chemical there earlier, simply to manufacture a reason for inspection. Amelia immediately insisted the bag be opened. Liam pushed back, telling her plainly that only someone with proper military authorization was permitted to look inside. His words only made her laugh harder, convinced he was inventing an excuse to hide something embarrassing and personal. Logan gave a subtle signal to a man posing as airport security, who then claimed full authority to open the bag in the name of flight safety. Liam noticed an inconsistency on the man's identification badge but chose not to expose it yet, wanting first to understand who was truly directing the operation unfolding around him. The lock finally gave way, and every trace of laughter in the cabin vanished at once. Inside sat a sealed hard drive marked with military codes, a detailed map of a base called Falcon Ridge, an encrypted communication device, a badge from a unit known as Sentinel, and an old photograph of Liam in uniform standing beside faces that had been deliberately blurred. Amelia went pale the instant she recognized the word Nightglass stamped across the drive, the very project her own company was about to sign a defense contract to support. For a long moment nobody in the cabin spoke at all. The attendant who had insisted on the search took a step backward, suddenly unsure what she had actually uncovered. Passengers nearby leaned away instinctively, sensing that something far more serious than an argument over legroom had just unfolded in front of them. Amelia's earlier confidence drained out of her posture, replaced by a stillness that made her look, for the first time that morning, genuinely unsure of herself. Logan watched from his seat with practiced composure, careful to let his expression mirror everyone else's shock rather than betray any prior knowledge. He had planned this exact moment for weeks, counting on Amelia's pride to manufacture the very confrontation that would place her directly beside Liam and his cargo. Nothing about the search had happened by accident, though only one person on the aircraft understood that fact completely. Liam reached for the bag calmly, refusing to let anyone else touch it again, and studied the faces around him with the patient attention of a man cataloging threats rather than reacting to embarrassment. He had seen operations unravel before because someone panicked at the wrong moment, and he had no intention of letting pride, his own or anyone else's, compromise what remained of his assignment. Liam closed the bag at once and asked the captain to halt the flight before takeoff, explaining that a broken military seal meant his assignment had already been compromised. Amelia demanded to know why data connected to her own company had been sitting in a stranger's luggage, but Liam refused to answer until her clearance could be properly confirmed. His silence felt like an insult to a woman used to answers arriving the moment she asked for them. She insisted that Sterling Aeronautics had helped design part of the Nightglass system, expecting the claim to earn her some authority in the conversation. Liam corrected her without raising his voice, explaining that her company built only a supporting navigation component, while the material in his bag could control an entire defense network. The man posing as security suddenly pulled a stun weapon and lunged toward Liam, who sidestepped the attack, locked the man's wrist, and drove him to the floor within seconds. The cabin dissolved into chaos as Hunter and another operative rose from their seats, pretending to be frightened passengers caught in the disturbance. Liam quickly noticed that the fake officer's phone was receiving a signal originating from somewhere inside first class itself. That signal seemed to trace back to a small device hidden in Logan's briefcase, though Logan had already slipped it into another passenger's jacket pocket, leaving Liam without proof he could act on yet. The captain received an order to return to the gate, but the communication system suddenly filled with static, and the cockpit stopped responding to calls. Jackson Reed contacted Liam through an encrypted line, warning him that the Nightglass network had just been breached, and that a coordinated assault was being launched from the ground below. Amelia began to understand this was no longer a simple misunderstanding, recalling that Logan alone had arranged her sudden switch onto this flight after her private jet failed. She looked at him, but he remained composed, his face arranged into practiced concern for her safety. Liam's device lit up with a red warning. The decoy hard drive had been identified, and the true target was already on board. The realization settled over him with the weight of old memory. He had built his entire operation around the assumption that the physical drive was the prize worth protecting, yet the warning made clear that whoever orchestrated this attack already understood the drive was bait. Only a handful of people outside his own command had ever known that detail, which meant the leak reached further inside Sterling Aeronautics than anyone had accounted for. Amelia stood frozen near the galley wall, trying to process how quickly her ordinary business trip had collapsed into something unrecognizable. She kept replaying the moment she had mocked his bag, wondering now whether her own carelessness had somehow triggered everything unfolding around her. Guilt mixed uncomfortably with fear, though she pushed both aside long enough to notice that Logan had not moved from his seat since the disturbance began, watching the chaos with an unsettling stillness rather than alarm. Liam noticed it too. In his experience, people who were truly innocent reacted to danger with confusion or panic, not with the calm, calculating patience Logan now displayed. He said nothing yet, unwilling to accuse a man he could not yet prove was guilty, but he filed the observation away carefully, the same way he had filed away every detail since stepping off the jet bridge that morning. The aircraft began shifting altitude without any command from the pilots, a hostile program having slipped into the navigation system undetected. Liam understood that the hard drive in his bag was only one piece of a larger assignment, since the most critical data lived instead on a small biometric device tied to his own fingerprint and heartbeat. Hunter rose from his seat and drew a weapon hidden inside a false compartment of his luggage, announcing that the plane was now under his control and demanding that Liam surrender the bag immediately. He addressed Liam by an old military call sign, Sentinel-1, and Amelia froze as she realized the quiet man beside her was never an ordinary contractor. Liam quietly asked her to remove the metal pin from her jacket, then used it to pry open a panel beneath the seat, cutting power to that section and plunging the cabin into darkness for several long seconds. In that darkness, he disarmed one gunman, took his weapon, and pulled Amelia into the forward galley before anyone could react. She wanted to call Logan for help, but Liam stopped her, asking pointedly who else knew her private flight schedule, who knew about the jet's failure, and who had arranged her switch to this particular flight. Amelia was forced to admit that Logan alone controlled every detail Liam had just listed. Liam concluded that whoever had betrayed her needed Amelia alive, since her personal authorization could still unlock the servers at Sterling Aeronautics. Hunter announced over the intercom that if Liam refused to surrender, passengers would be harmed, leaving Liam unable to strike directly and forcing him to search instead for a way to reclaim control of the aircraft systems. Amelia offered a schematic of the navigation hardware her own company manufactured, and together they found a maintenance access point known only to senior engineers. They crawled together through a service corridor toward an auxiliary control panel, and along the way Amelia apologized quietly for mocking him earlier. Liam did not answer right away, only telling her later that her arrogance had given their enemies exactly the excuse they needed to open that bag. Just as they neared the panel, Logan stepped out behind them and aimed a weapon squarely at Amelia. The narrow service corridor smelled faintly of oil and recycled air, and Liam moved through it with the quiet efficiency of a man who had crawled through far tighter spaces under far worse circumstances. Amelia followed behind him, surprised by how naturally her body adjusted to instructions she would never have accepted from anyone else only hours earlier. She found herself trusting his judgment completely, not because he had earned that trust through words, but because every action he took proved more competent than the last. Along the way, she asked quietly why he had chosen a life of contract security instead of returning to whatever unit had trained him so thoroughly. Liam answered without elaborating much, saying only that some choices existed to protect the people closest to you, even at the cost of the career you once imagined for yourself. Amelia thought of her own choices, of the empire she had built and the trust she had handed so freely to a man she barely questioned, and the comparison left her strangely unsettled. She had spent years believing that competence wore expensive suits and confident handshakes, yet the man crawling ahead of her through a maintenance duct, wounded and calm, represented a kind of competence she had never learned to recognize. That realization arrived just as Logan's voice cut through the corridor behind them, cold and certain, ordering them both to stop exactly where they stood. Logan admitted he had spent months building this plan, using the defense contract between Sterling Aeronautics and the Pentagon to learn precisely when the night glass data would be moved. He confessed that Amelia's private jet had been sabotaged on purpose, all so she would end up on this exact flight beside Liam, giving him a path to her biometric clearance. Amelia felt something break inside her as she realized the man she trusted above everyone else had been manipulating her for months. Logan revealed that Hunter intended to force the plane down at an abandoned airfield, where a waiting technical team would extract the data and destroy the aircraft, arranging the wreckage to resemble a simple accident. He ordered Liam to hand over the authentication device, but Liam warned him that the data would erase itself the instant his heartbeat stopped, or the device was removed by force. Logan pressured Amelia to convince Liam to cooperate, and she pretended to plead with him while quietly using her jacket pin to cut wiring behind the control panel. A shower of sparks distracted Logan long enough for Liam to strike, but Hunter arrived and fired, wounding Liam in the shoulder. Still standing, Liam managed to push Amelia into a technical compartment and lock the door behind her, sealing himself outside with the two men. Inside, Amelia had no choice but to complete the sequence Liam had shown her earlier, connecting the auxiliary panel herself and sending an encrypted distress signal toward Falcon Ridge, something she had never done without an assistant or a subordinate beside her. Outside, Hunter pressed Liam for a decryption code, and Liam stalled by feeding him false information, buying precious time. Hunter mentioned Liam's final mission in Syria, where nearly his entire Sentinel unit had been wiped out after their position was sold to hostile mercenaries, and Liam realized this same network was tied to the deaths of men he had once served beside. Carrying the nightglass data safely now meant more than completing a national assignment. It meant finally uncovering who had betrayed his unit years earlier. Amelia's signal finally went through, but the screen returned a chilling reply. Falcon Ridge itself had already been compromised from within. Locked inside the small compartment, Amelia stared at the panel Liam had shown her only minutes earlier, her hands shaking as she repeated each step from memory. She had built an entire career on delegating difficult tasks to specialists, surrounding herself with engineers and advisors who handled precisely this kind of technical work. Now, isolated and frightened, she understood for the first time what it meant to have no one left to hand the problem to. She thought of every meeting where she had dismissed a warning as overly cautious, every report from Violet's team that she had signed off on without reading closely enough. Her success had always felt earned through decisiveness and confidence, yet decisiveness meant nothing in a corridor where she could not tell friend from enemy. The device finally connected, and for one brief moment relief flooded through her chest before the returned message erased it entirely. Outside the sealed door, Liam absorbed Hunter's words about Syria without letting a single flicker of emotion cross his face, though inside old grief surfaced with a sharpness he had not felt in years. He remembered names he rarely allowed himself to think about anymore, men who had trusted the same intelligence networks that were now, apparently, still rotten at their core. Whoever had sold out his unit years earlier had never been caught, and Hunter's casual mention of that ambush told Liam the thread he had been quietly pulling for years finally had an end within reach. The aircraft continued drifting toward the abandoned airfield, with less than 30 minutes remaining before it would touch down. Amelia slipped out of the technical compartment through a maintenance hatch and found a backup satellite phone, using it to reach her chief engineer, Violet Hayes, back at Sterling Aeronautics headquarters. Violet revealed that Logan had forced her to install a hidden back door inside the navigation software, and she passed along an override code that could only be entered directly from the cockpit. The cockpit itself was still held by an armed mercenary. Rather than hide, Amelia went back for Liam instead of running, using a fire extinguisher to create a wall of smoke that let him break free from Hunter's grip. Wounded but steady, Liam disabled two gunmen with short, precise movements, careful never to endanger the passengers seated nearby. Hunter fled toward the cargo hold to retrieve a backup detonator he had stashed earlier. Liam sent Amelia toward the cockpit to enter Violet's override code, and though she feared he would not survive without her, he reminded her that hundreds of passengers depended entirely on the choice she made next. Pushing past her fear, Amelia convinced the lead flight attendant to help her, and together they used a service cart to block the aisle and distract the guard standing watch. Inside the cockpit, the pilots were shaken but alive, and Amelia entered Violet's code, reclaiming partial control of the aircraft's systems. The plane could not simply turn back, since its fuel controls had already been tampered with, so the crew pressed on toward Colorado Springs while steering clear of the abandoned airfield. Toward the rear, Liam finally confronted Hunter, who admitted his role in the ambush that had once devastated the Sentinel unit years earlier. Their fight played out in the cramped cargo space, Liam wounded but relentless, eventually pinning Hunter's arm with a length of cargo strap. Hunter triggered a timed device hidden inside a suitcase, leaving Liam only minutes to disarm it, and it was the worn canvas bag Amelia had once mocked that carried the specialized tools disguised beneath ordinary fabric, tools that became the one thing capable of saving the entire flight. Amelia stood near the cockpit doorway, watching the countdown reflected faintly on a nearby screen, and found herself praying in a way she had not done since childhood. She thought of every person seated behind her, strangers whose names she would never learn, whose lives now depended entirely on a wounded man working alone in a cramped cargo hold. For the first time in longer than she could remember, none of her wealth, her title, or her influence could change the outcome of what happened next. Inside the cargo space, Liam worked with steady hands despite the pain radiating from his shoulder, each motion drawn from years of training that had never fully left his muscles even after he traded a uniform for a quieter life. He thought briefly of his daughter, of the promise he had made himself never to let his past collide with her future, and pushed the thought aside so it would not slow his hands at the moment they needed to move fastest. The bag lay open beside him, hiding a precision toolkit built for exactly this kind of emergency, a toolkit no airport agent or curious CEO had ever suspected existed beneath such an unremarkable exterior. It was, in its own quiet way, a fitting symbol for the man who carried it, someone whose worth had never depended on how he looked to people quick enough to judge him at a glance. Liam disarmed the device with only seconds to spare, but Logan had already seized the hard drive and dropped through the landing gear bay, preparing to escape once the aircraft touched down. Amelia's voice came over the intercom, warning everyone that Logan was carrying data capable of crippling the country's entire air defense network. 2 fighter jets escorted the aircraft the rest of the way toward Falcon Ridge, though Liam knew better than to trust every soldier waiting on the ground, given how deeply the base itself had been infiltrated. Jackson Reed made contact and guided the captain toward a secondary runway reserved for emergencies. The moment the plane rolled to a stop, Logan slipped out through the landing gear bay and sprinted toward a distant hangar, where an accomplice's vehicle waited. Liam tried to follow, but his wound nearly buckled his legs beneath him. Amelia grabbed a medical kit, wrapped his shoulder herself, and insisted she would go with him. He argued that she had no training for what lay ahead, but Amelia answered that Logan still needed her clearance, and that if she stayed behind, he would either return for her or simply continue attacking her company from the shadows. Together they moved through a maintenance tunnel leading toward the Nightglass Control Center, where they found Violet, who had flown in the night before to inspect the system and had just escaped a group of infiltrators herself. Violet explained that Logan did not need the entire hard drive, only 60 seconds connected to the Nightglass server to copy its master control key. Jackson arrived with a small team of federal agents, but before they could reach the control room, a base officer suddenly shot Jackson and revealed himself as an inside operative. Liam pulled Jackson to safety, but Logan used the chaos to seize Amelia as a hostage, dragging her into the server room and forcing her to submit to a retinal scan. Amelia understood in that instant that every mistake had begun the day she assumed power and title could reveal a person's true character, when in truth Logan, not Liam, had never deserved her trust. The server room door sealed shut, and a countdown for the data copy began ticking down from 60 seconds. Falcon Ridge itself looked nothing like the imposing fortress Amelia had imagined during years of contract negotiations. Concrete corridors stretched in every direction, lit by cold fluorescent light, staffed by soldiers who moved with the efficient detachment of people trained never to ask unnecessary questions. She had signed documents referencing this base for years without ever once setting foot inside it, and the disconnect between paperwork and reality struck her harder than she expected given everything else happening around her. Liam moved through the corridors with quiet familiarity, clearly no stranger to bases like this one despite the plain clothes he still wore. Amelia noticed soldiers nodding at him with a kind of recognition reserved for people who had earned respect through actions rather than rank, and she understood, watching those small exchanges, just how much of his life had remained hidden behind a canvas bag and a modest job title. When Jackson fell, struck by a supposed ally, something in Amelia hardened rather than broke. She had spent the morning learning that betrayal could wear any uniform and any smile, and rather than freezing in shock, she found herself moving to help drag Jackson toward cover, surprising even herself with how naturally her hands worked despite having no training for any of it. It was, in its own way, the first genuinely selfless action she had taken in longer than she cared to admit. Logan kept his weapon pressed close to Amelia while the data transfer continued, promising that once Nightglass was sold, he would vanish and let her authorization codes take the blame for everything that had happened. Liam approached the server room through an overhead vent, unable to fire while Logan used Amelia as a shield. Amelia caught his reflection in the glass of a server panel and understood he was waiting for her to create even the smallest opening. She began taunting Logan's greed, telling him he would always be remembered only as a man who lived in someone else's shadow. The insult broke his composure, and he swung his weapon toward the monitor to prove his victory was already secured. In that instant, Amelia yanked the data cable free with both hands, and though Logan struck her down, the copy process failed at the 57th second. Liam shattered the glass and drove into Logan, and the two men grappled violently between the humming server racks. Logan tried to level his weapon at Amelia again, but she flung Liam's worn canvas bag directly into his arm, throwing his aim wide. Liam subdued him at last, binding his wrists with the same military strap that had once sealed the bag shut. Violet checked the server and confirmed that the fragment of data already copied could still be transmitted unless the entire Nightglass system was shut down completely. Cutting the system meant Sterling Aeronautics would lose the largest contract in its history, since the company itself was responsible for the very backdoor that had made this attack possible. Amelia did not hesitate. She ordered every access key erased and pledged, on the spot, to report her company's failures to federal investigators without delay. That choice protected the nation's defense network but very likely cost her the position she had built her entire career around. Nightglass was disabled just in time, and Logan, Hunter, and the remaining infiltrators were taken into custody. Liam looked down at his torn and battered bag lying on the floor, and Amelia quietly picked it up, handing it back to him with both hands. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The server room hummed quietly around them, indifferent to everything that had just occurred within its walls, while emergency lighting cast a pale glow over broken glass and scattered cables. Amelia's hands trembled slightly as she held the bag out, and Liam noticed the change in how she looked at it now, no longer the careless glance of someone dismissing an object beneath her attention, but something closer to respect earned through fear and consequence rather than comfort. She thought about the version of herself who had boarded that flight only hours earlier, certain that appearances told her everything worth knowing about a stranger. That version of her felt impossibly distant now, replaced by someone forced to understand. In the span of a single terrifying morning, that character rarely announces itself through wardrobe or luggage. Liam accepted the bag without a word of reproach, understanding that Amelia's lesson, however painful, had already begun to take root somewhere deeper than pride. Federal agents soon flooded the corridor, securing Logan, Hunter, and the remaining conspirators while medical personnel moved quickly to treat Liam's wound and check on Jackson, who remained stable despite his injury. Amelia stood quietly to one side, watching order slowly return to a base she had never truly understood until today, aware that whatever came next for her career would look nothing like the confident path she had followed until that morning. The federal investigation confirmed that Logan had manipulated numerous contracts and built an entire espionage network inside Sterling Aeronautics over several years. Amelia called a press conference and openly admitted that she had ignored internal warnings and handed far too much authority to a single man she never properly questioned. The board pressed her to step down, and she agreed to step aside temporarily to cooperate fully with investigators and rebuild the company from within. She refused to blame her subordinates or protect her own image at their expense. Violet was appointed acting head of engineering and immediately began closing the security gaps that Logan had exploited for so long. Jackson, recovering from his wound, offered Liam a permanent command role back within the Sentinel unit, but Liam declined a standing leadership position, choosing instead to protect the steady life he had built for his family. He agreed only to serve as a special advisor for missions of genuine importance. Reporters gathered outside the board meeting where Amelia announced her temporary departure, many of them expecting excuses or careful legal language designed to protect her reputation. Instead, she offered a plain account of every warning she had ignored and every question she should have asked long before Logan gained the influence he later used against her company. Analysts speculated for weeks about whether Sterling Aeronautics could survive such a public admission of failure, though inside the company itself, morale slowly began shifting towards something steadier than the culture of unquestioned authority that had preceded it. Liam's recovery moved slowly at first, his shoulder aching through weeks of physical therapy. Though the quiet hospital room gave him time, he rarely allowed himself to rest. His daughter visited often, more curious than worried, treating his injury as an inconvenience rather than a tragedy, which suited Liam perfectly given how carefully he had always shielded her from the more dangerous corners of his past. Amelia visited Liam at the military hospital where he was recovering, bringing along his bag, carefully mended yet still marked with its original patches. She apologized, not only for mocking him aboard the flight, but for a deeper arrogance that had nearly gotten innocent people killed. Liam told her plainly that an apology only means something when it changes how a person treats those who can offer them nothing in return. Amelia accepted the reminder without argument or excuse. Before she left his room, she asked, almost hesitantly, whether one day she might invite him for coffee, without bodyguards, contracts, or military secrets standing between them. Liam did not answer right away, but the faint smile that crossed his face made clear the door was not entirely closed. 6 months later, Sterling Aeronautics operated under a new layer of independent oversight that Amelia herself had proposed. She returned to the company only after being fully cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, though her authority now answered to a security board with real power of its own. She launched a formal whistleblower protection program and required every senior executive to complete hands-on security training modeled on what had nearly destroyed the company. Liam became a security advisor for select defense projects, working a flexible schedule that let him remain present for his family. His young daughter was mentioned only once in passing as the person who had helped him pick a new patch for his old bag. Amelia met Liam again at a small coffee shop near the airport, arriving this time without an assistant or a car waiting outside. Looking at the worn bag resting beside his chair, Amelia no longer saw something to mock. She saw loyalty, loss, and a man who had once risked everything to protect people who had judged him unfairly from the very start. Liam slid a cup of coffee across the table toward her. The story closed as Amelia finally sat down across from someone without asking first what he did for a living before deciding whether he deserved her respect. Sunlight fell through the window of the small shop, catching the frayed edges of the bag beside his chair, and for a moment neither of them spoke, simply comfortable in a silence they had both earned the hard way. Amelia thought back often to that morning aboard the flight, to the version of herself who believed she could measure a person's worth from across an aisle in a matter of seconds. She had rebuilt more than a company in the months since. She had rebuilt the way she looked at people entirely. Liam, for his part, had made peace with a truth he once kept carefully guarded. That quiet strength rarely needed an audience to prove itself real. He no longer needed to hide behind an ordinary job title to feel safe, though he still preferred a life measured in small, steady mornings rather than headlines or applause. Across the table, Amelia lifted her cup and smiled, no longer the woman who once laughed at a stranger's bag, but someone finally willing to sit still long enough to actually see the person in front of her. A worn bag never told the truth about the man carrying it, and neither did his quiet manner or his simple clothes. The real danger that day was never hidden in canvas and thread. It was hiding in plain sight, wearing a tailored suit and a familiar, trusted smile. If this story reminded you that judgment built on appearance alone is often the most dangerous mistake a person can make, sit with that thought for a while. The people who seem easiest to overlook are sometimes the very ones holding everything together. Thank you for staying with this story until its final word and until the next one begins.